Guys, James here. Today I'm going to be talking to you about this, I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This book is a true crime book that follows the search for the Golden State Killer, who is a serial killer slash mass rapist who has been responsible for heinous crimes throughout the 70s and 80s. He was responsible for confirmed at least 50 rapes, at least 13 murders, and presumably also 120 burglaries, though there is some debate about that as well. So, let's talk about sort of the angle this book takes, because it is true crime. It's obviously not fictionalized. This is a real man who really exists, and he has been apprehended. So don't be scared of him anymore. He is behind bars and he is an old man now. The reason why this book in particular is interesting is because of the real length and doggedness of this case. Obviously, the Golden State Killer has many nicknames. He's known as many things. He is the Visalia Ransacker. He is the East Area Rapist. He is the original Night Stalker. And he is the Golden State Killer. His real name is Joe DeAngelo, in case you were wondering. Right, so this book follows mainly Michelle McNamara's experiences with the case of the Golden State Killer. She is the one who coined the term Golden State Killer when she was doing an article about him for a Los Angeles magazine, I believe. So, why is Michelle McNamara, a crime writer, getting involved in this case, and what was her involvement? How did the case progress? These are all the sort of things that this book covers. I've seen criticisms of this book online saying, you know, there's not that many details about the crimes themselves, and I can attest that that is in fact true. There are not too many concrete details about the actual crimes. The chronology is a little bit scattered and all over the place, but I think there are some good reasons for that, which I'll go into really as the review progresses. So, what Michelle McNamara has really tried to do with this book to separate it from other true crime books is focus less on the actual crimes that the guy committed and more on the stories of the victims and the investigators that have been affected by his series of fucking crimes. It's hard to say it's been affected by his work. It's not really a job, killing and doing the rapes. So yeah, it takes a more humanist approach, I think, to the true crime bent. There's a trend in sort of historical books, like actual history books, and historical non-fiction, to be very fact heavy. This can be the case with true crime as well. I've not read too much true crime, but the stuff that I have read, it tends to be that very sort of fact-based thing, like, you know, establish the timeline, this is what happened, these are the events, you know, and these were the consequences. You know, it's very much focused on the killer and the acts themselves. But this book takes the approach of going at it from a more humanistic point of view. It talks about, first of all, we're talking about Michelle McNamara, who was obviously a journalist who became you know, a sort of amateur investigator of this kind of crime. And there's a whole community that she discusses that are spring up around that. There's also all of this talk about, you know, because the case was so expansive. You know, this is a guy who operated all over California for 10 years without being caught by anyone. And during that time, so many different jurisdictions and departments and people were coming and going throughout the case. And then obviously after he'd finished his crime wave, they didn't catch him for like 30 years still. So there's a lot of people that have been involved and affected by this case, and I think it's such a fascinating process to investigate their lives. We talk about the victims, like obviously there's so many crimes that he did, it would be impossible. Like the book would be this thick to go into all of them in significant detail. And I think one of the strengths of this book is that it really gives you it's so hard talking about rape and murder and then saying something like highlights, but it gives you like the overview, of the key moments in the case, really sort of when the key developments happened, when he transitioned from one spate of crimes, when he moved from burglary to rape to murder, and it gives you the backstory and like an insight into who the people were. Like there's a really good passage about the Domingo killing, which is obviously a woman called Sherry Domingo and her like boyfriend, on and off boyfriend, Greg. I want to say his last name is Sanchez. That may be wrong, but I think it's Greg Sanchez. But like, there's a whole story about how there would have been a third victim had she been home, but she wasn't home, and there's like a real explanation of why that setup was the way it was, and it just adds a more human element. It makes you see the impact of the crimes for what they were. I think there's a danger with true crime stuff to become too detached, and sort of see it all as very fact-based, which is why people can, like, I guess it keeps you at a safe distance, but taking a more analytical approach to the crimes. But this book really sort of thrusts you into the heart of the people involved and the investigation. It makes you feel more, definitely, for the people involved. There are certain characters, obviously, that stay consistent throughout. They're not characters, they are real people. Like Paul Holes is probably like the real face of the Golden State Killer case now, because he started on it in the 90s when it was a cold case, and they got the guy like a week after Paul Holes had retired, but like a lot of the stuff I'm saying about how he was captured and stuff is not in this book, because it was written by Michelle McNamara about 2 years before they eventually caught him. The reason why it took so long to come out is because, unfortunately, Michelle McNamara passed away before finishing the book, so a lot of it is reconstructed from her notes, and I don't know if that has affected the way it's structured at all, but I don't know, because so let's move on to some of these, like the criticisms, because this is relevant to what I'm trying to say here with her passing away. A lot of people that have reviewed this book have said, the structure is a little bit all over the place, and it's hard to follow with the timeline. And I would argue that whilst that's true, the timeline jumps around, from present day to the 70s to the 80s to the mid 70s to the late 70s, and then like they talk about the gap in between where he wasn't really doing much in the way of crime. The reason why I think that it was chosen to be presented that way is an enhancement of this idea that this case was really all over the place. There wasn't just one person investigating it, they stop, someone else takes over. There are people that have been, as this case has been going on, as the investigation progressed, there are people that go back to these old cases that are now decades past, looking for new clues, looking for evidence. So there was an element of jumping around from timeline to timeline during the investigation. So I think it only makes sense for that to sort of be the way the book is presented, because we're not talking about a straight timeline of this guy's activity. This isn't a book about the Golden State Killer. It's a book about the people investigating him and the people that were affected by him. And that sort of thing requires more of a complicated mesh of times and ideas than a simple, straightforward, A to B plot line, timeline of the events would, I think, allow you to do. So I think that it works in this context. I think for other more analytical styles, it wouldn't work so well. But just because of the way the book was chosen to be presented, I think that isn't something I found problematic for me. But I'll agree, it does make it sometimes a little bit hard to follow, you know, who, like, where is he at this particular time. You've got to sort of kind of pay attention and remember. There is, like, a good reference in the front. Like, they do, like, there's a whole timeline of, like, his activity in the front. So if you do get confused, if you do get lost, I mean, you can refer back to it. There is a reference thing there, but this is more of a human story than it is analytical discussion about the Golden State Killer's activity. Yeah, I mean, I just think the writing style of it as well is very powerful. Michelle McNamara has a very good way with words, especially with presenting these. You know, it's difficult because, like, because she's writing about people, real people that still exist, they're still alive. It borders a line where, you know, how much of the things that she's talking about in those passages are speculation on her part, how much is gleaned from interviewing the people, and I trust that she's done a lot of her due diligence, because the thing you take away from this book about Michelle McNamara, the person, is that she was very thorough in her investigation and her research, and I don't think she would skimp here. And I think her adding her perspective on the people really makes the events more evocative, and they're more powerful as a result. Like, as I said, the passage about, like, the whole chapter about, you know, the Domingos, and, like, there's a guy who's, like, there was a guy, one of the victims, like, his two brothers were instrumental in changing DNA law, and it was interesting to, like, hear about, you know, those people and, like, how things have been affected by him. And it's really just a fascinating case all around. Like, it's good now that it has what can only be considered, like, the most ideal conclusion that it could have. But obviously you don't get that ending in here. So I do kind of wish that this had been held off, you know, for 6 more months until we could get that addendum. But obviously by that point Michelle had already passed away, and then it wouldn't really be her story. I'm sure there will be other books about this guy. But hey ho, there you go. This one, definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of true crime, or if you're not really into true crime. Like, if you're into true crime, you'll probably really like this, but will have issues with some of the way that it's not really focused on the killer so much as it is with the people involved and the victims' stories and all of that kind of stuff. You know, the more human angle might put you off if you're into the more traditional fact-based true crime, but if you're someone like me who doesn't really engage in true crime and finds it kind of dry, then I would definitely recommend I'll Be Gone in the Dark, because it adds a much more human angle to these horrible fucking crimes, and it's really compelling, it's really well written, and I think it's like it's a story that I think should be told, because, you know, we all know about Ted Bundy and, you know, John Wayne Gacy and all those fucking psychos, but this guy went under the radar for a fucking long time, you know, and maybe more people should know about it. So that's it, my thoughts on I'll Be Gone in the Dark. I will be back with another video at some point, I'm sure, and until then, I'll see you next time. Do all the likes and stuff and subscribe and tell me what you think. Have you ever heard of the Golden State Killer? Have you read I'll Be Gone in the Dark? And do you like true crime in general? Let me know in the comments and we'll have a chat or something. Until then, yeah, whatever. I've already done the outro, so I'm just going to turn the camera off. See you later. Bye.